This Newsela article is called Philosophers Who Influenced the American Revolution and Constitution, and it was published in 2019, originally by UXL Civics. These are some pictures of these Enlightenment philosophers that we're going to talk about in the next couple days and will be featured in this article. It says, these philosophers influenced the creation of the U.S. government. Clockwise from left, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Charles Montesquieu. As the founders of the United States drafted ideas for a new government, they relied on earlier work of several philosophers. Four, in particular, provided the intellectual and political foundations of the new American government. Strong government. Thomas Hobbes, who lived from 1588 to 1679, was one of these philosophers. He penned the British classic Leviathan in 1651, which concluded with the idea that humanity, in general, is incapable of ruling itself. So the note I said there was like, do you agree with that? Do you agree with Thomas Hobbes there, that we as people are incapable of ruling ourselves? He argued that people tend to be self-centered and argumentative, which makes self-rule impossible. Hobbes believed that because of this, the masses required strong leadership to control them, or in the case of a nation, a strong government. Life, liberty, and property. My note says liberty here means like freedom, the freedom to make important decisions for yourself, to not have anyone decide for you like a king or a landlord. Another influential British philosopher was John Locke, who lived from 1632 to 1704, who lived during the age of Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a cultural movement that began in late 17th century, which is the 1600s, in Europe. It emphasized individualism and reason over tradition. Locke arguably had the most influence on the content of the U.S. Constitution, particularly the ideas he set forth in his most famous work, Two Treatises of Government, in 1689. In this text, Locke stated that natural rights like life, liberty, and property were inalienable or impossible to surrender, meaning you cannot give them up. They can't be taken from you. The job of government was to uphold laws that protected those rights. Locke's perspective on the social contract was very different than what Hobbes put forth, and less than 100 years later, those concepts were integral to the Declaration of Independence. The American idea for three branches of government came from the French-born philosopher Charles Montesquieu, who lived from 1689 to 1755. Montesquieu's treatise, The Spirit of the Laws, in 1748, explains that man, by nature, is fearful. People are therefore inclined to avoid violence and war. But the need for food trumps that fear and forces individuals to live together in a society. Soon, individuals cease to be equal, and this inequality leads to conflict and war. The reason Montesquieu suggested was that those who are perceived as inferior are forced to live with the inequality or fight to change their circumstances. A good example of this is the American Revolution, in which many American colonists grew weary of living under British tyranny and so chose to fight for their independence. War leads to a need for laws and government, the primary purpose of which is to maintain law and order while protecting political liberty and individual property. According to Montesquieu, the ideal government would consist of an executive, judicial, and legislative branch. That's three branches. Each is empowered with the ability to limit the other's power. The social contract. Swiss-born philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived from 1712 to 1778, also developed ideas that were incorporated by the founders of the United States. Rousseau wrote a political theory titled The Social Contract in 1762. Its first sentence reads, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." He believed strongly that the individual should never be forced to sacrifice his rights to any ruler or leader. Every person in the land should have the right to vote to express his general beliefs. Rousseau identified government as a human invention. It serves as a sort of contract between common people and those who govern them. According to the contract, citizens should elect people to represent their needs and desires. Doing so would allow individuals' rights, happiness, and property to be better protected than it would be in an everyone for themselves type of society. The philosopher also offered a warning. This contract could quickly become dangerous if the most powerful members of society, traditionally also the wealthiest, created social and economic inequality as a permanent feature of a nation. Rousseau argued that government needs to protect all people equally, or it breaks the social contract. His ideas were essential in the formation of the US government, which focused on shared power and equal rights for all citizens. If you scroll down to this last page, these are some infographics that I find to be handy ways of seeing a visual to explain some of the beliefs of these philosophers. So you can see with A, this is a table that shows what these three philosophers, Rousseau, Locke, and Hobbes, believed to be the best type of government, the natural state of human nature, how we are when we are born, how we come into this world. I always ask students to think of a baby on the day they enter the world. What rights and condition is that baby entering the world? Does that baby enter the world with all of these rights, or does that baby have to claim their rights as they move through life? Basic human rights. What do these philosophers view as the basic human rights? What do these three philosophers view as the social contract between us and a government? What do we do for our government so that our government does something for us, and vice versa? What is the role of government in the lives of individuals? What's the role of a state? What should a state or a government be doing? And then their views on religion. The next two, this is a depiction of the three branches of government and the separation of powers that we get from Montesquieu. Maybe this looks familiar from elementary school in third grade, but this is the separation of powers. So what powers do each of these branches have, and how are they separate from one another? And then this is a depiction of the checks and balances. So the check that each branch has on the other branch of government, because they all are able to check the power of the other two branches. Hope that helps.